My name is Claire Fontaine. I am 32 years old. I am a licensed criminal defense attorney at a private firm in Boston, Massachusetts, where I've practiced for 6 years with a focus on white-collar crime, identity fraud, and financial criminal defense. Yeah, I know exactly how identity theft works. I know how it is prosecuted, how it is investigated, how the paper trail is built, how the digital record is assembled, and how the person whose identity was stolen is distinguished legally, documentably, and permanently from the person who stole it. I know all of this because it is my profession and because I have spent 6 years defending people accused of it, and because 3 years ago, my identical twin sister, a woman named Sophie Fontaine, who shares my face and my voice and my blood type and the first 18 years of my life, stole mine. Not metaphorically. Not in the way people use that phrase loosely to describe someone who overshadowed them or outcompeted them or made them feel erased, literally. She took my name, my credentials, my apartment, my professional references, and the man I was engaged to marry, and she built a life with all of it for 37 months while I was 3 states away, believing that the distance between us was a choice she had made and not a construction she had needed. I want to be precise about the timeline because precision is the foundation of everything in this story. Sophie began using my identity in March of 3 years ago. I did not discover it until 14 months later, in May of 2 years ago, when a credit alert on an account I had not opened appeared on my phone at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. I spent 8 months after that building the documentation of what she had done before I acted on it because I am an attorney and I understand that acting before your documentation is complete is how you lose cases. You should win. I was patient for 8 months. I assembled everything. Then last week, Sophie called a Boston police station from a holding cell, gave them my name, my bar number, and my firm's phone number, and asked to speak to her attorney. The desk officer called my firm. My assistant transferred the call to my office. I picked up the phone. I heard my sister's voice say my name as her own. I let her finish the call. What she told me in that phone call, believing she was speaking to a stranger who shared her attorney's name, is the reason this story ends the way it ends. Before I tell you what she said, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story genuinely connects with you. Drop a comment and tell me what time it is where you are. I always love seeing where you're all listening from. Now let me take you back to Boston. 3 years ago, the week Sophie called me and said she needed to disappear for a while, and I told her I understood, and I helped her pack. Let me tell you about Sophie Fontaine before I tell you what she did, because the architecture of what happened is impossible to understand without understanding her. And understanding her is something I have spent 32 years attempting with mixed results. We are identical twins. I want you to hold that fact throughout this entire story because it is not a background detail. It is the mechanism of everything. We share a face. We share a voice with a specific tonal quality. The twins who grew up in the same house and absorbed the same speech patterns from the same parents develop. Similar enough that people who know us both have mistaken one for the other on the phone our entire lives. We share a height, a build, a bone structure, a resting expression that our mother always called serious, and our father always called watchful. From the outside, the differences between us are minimal. From the inside, they are everything. Sophie and I grew up in Portland, Maine. the daughters of a French-Canadian father who taught high school history and an American mother who was a registered nurse, and who between them produced two daughters who were identical in appearance and completely divergent in character in a way that became apparent early and intensified consistently through childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. I was the one who studied. Sophie was the one who performed. I was the one who read the rules to understand them. Sophie was the one who read the rules to understand which ones could be bent and how far. I was the one who planned. Sophie was the one who improvised. These are not judgments. They are descriptions. I love my sister with the specific completeness that comes from sharing a womb and 18 years of daily life. And I loved her because of what she was, and not despite it, because her particular quality of brilliant improvisation was genuinely wonderful to witness when it was directed at the right things, and it often was. She was funny in the way that fast, unguarded people are funny without setup or performance. Just the immediate reflex of a mind that saw things sideways and said so. She was generous with the same impulsiveness she brought to everything. She was loyal until she wasn't. And the until was the part that took me 32 years to fully map. The pattern that ended in what happened 3 years ago had been establishing itself for the decade before it. Sophie had a talent for beginning things she could not sustain. She started a graduate program in communications at 23 and left after one semester because it moved too slowly. She started a business with a friend at 25 that lasted 8 months before the friendship, and the business collapsed simultaneously. She started relationships with consistent and genuine intensity and ended them with the same speed when the intensity became dailiness. She borrowed money with every intention of repaying it and repaid it inconsistently and with a specific quality of guilt that was genuine and did not change the behavior. She called me when things fell apart, which was often, and I helped her in the ways I could, which was consistently, because she was my sister and because helping her felt like the correct application of the stability I had that she didn't. And because every time I helped her, she was so completely and transparently grateful that the gratitude temporarily made the pattern invisible. I was 32 years old before I understood that the gratitude and the pattern were not separate things. The gratitude was part of the pattern. It was how the pattern sustained itself. She was grateful because she needed to be. She needed to be because she was going to need me again. And I helped her because I loved her and because I was good at the kind of help she needed, and because I had not yet understood that some help is a structure built on a foundation that eventually cannot hold the weight. 3 years ago, Sophie was living in Boston. She'd been there for 2 years, working at a marketing firm, living in a studio apartment in Allston, dating a man named Daniel, who was a financial analyst and who she described on the phone with a specific, breathless certainty she brought to the early stages of everything as the person she had been waiting for. I was in Providence, Rhode Island, where I had been since law school, at the firm where I had made associate the previous year. We talked on the phone twice a week. We saw each other monthly. I was engaged to a man named James Whitfield, a civil engineer I had met at a professional event 2 years earlier, patient and methodical and steady in the ways I was and in the ways Sophie was not. And he and Sophie had a relationship of mutual warm tolerance that I had always thought was the natural equilibrium of two people who both loved me in different ways. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about several things that I had held as settled facts for years, and the process of discovering that I was wrong about them happened all at once over a period of 8 months 2 years ago. in a way that I am still honestly not fully done processing. I want to be honest about that because this story is not a story about a woman who had everything figured out. It is a story about a woman who thought she did and discovered the specific cost of that assumption. Sophie called me in March, 3 years ago, on a Wednesday evening. She said she was in trouble. Not trouble in the abstract sense she sometimes used when she meant she was overwhelmed or behind on bills or in a difficult relationship phase. Trouble in a specific sense. She had made a financial decision at work that her employer was now characterizing as misconduct. She was facing a potential termination and possibly a legal complaint. She needed to leave Boston for a while. She needed to figure out what came next from somewhere that was not the city where everything had just collapsed. She was crying in the way she cried when things were genuinely bad and not just frustrating. The specific quality of her crying that I had known since we were children, and that I could read the way you read a frequency you have been calibrated to for your entire life. I said I understood. I said she could come to Providence and stay with me. She said she didn't want to impose. I said she was my sister and she was not imposing. She said she needed a few days to handle some things first. I said, of course. I said, call me when you're ready and I'll come help you move. She said, thank you, Claire. You always know what to do. I said, I love you. She said, I love you too. She did not come to Providence. She did not call to say she wasn't coming. She simply went quiet in the way that Sophie sometimes went quiet. And I gave her space in the way I had always given her space. And 2 weeks became a month, became 3 months. And when I finally reached her, she was vague in the specific way of someone who is stabilized and is slightly embarrassed about the intensity of the crisis that preceded the stability. She said she was okay. She said she had figured some things out. She said she would explain when she was ready. I said, okay. I said I was glad she was okay. I did not push. I should have pushed. The reason I should have pushed was already in motion, and I did not know it yet. The credit alert appeared on my phone at 6:04 a.m. on a Tuesday in May, 14 months after Sophie's phone call. It was from the monitoring service I used as standard professional practice. I worked in financial criminal defense, and maintaining clean personal financial records was both professionally advisable and personally habitual. The alert flagged a new credit inquiry on my file from a Boston-based residential leasing company. I had not applied for an apartment in Boston. I had not applied for any apartment. I was still living in Providence, in the apartment I had shared with James until our engagement ended 8 months earlier, which I had kept alone since then. I looked at the alert for a moment. Then I opened my credit report. The inquiry was the most recent in a series I had not made. There were 3 others in the preceding 14 months. A utility account opened in Boston in April of the previous year, a cell phone contract in June, a credit card application in September that had been declined, all in Boston. All under my name, my social security number, my date of birth. All opened or applied for after March of 3 years ago, which was the month Sophie had told me she was in trouble and needed to leave the city and had not come to Providence. I sat with my phone in my kitchen in Providence at 6:04 a.m., and I understood. Not partially, and not with a soft ambiguity of suspicion. Completely. The way you understand something that has been true for a long time and is now simply visible. I understood that Sophie had not left Boston. I understood that she had not left Boston because she had not needed to leave Boston. She had needed to leave her version of Boston, her apartment, her job, her employer's pending complaint, her name in the context of all of those things. She had needed a different version of Boston. She had taken mine. I sat with this understanding for 11 minutes by the clock on my microwave. And then I made coffee and I went to my desk and I opened my laptop and I began to build the documentation of what she had done because I was a criminal defense attorney and I understood that the documentation was the only thing that was going to determine what happened next, and what happened next was going to need to be decided very carefully. What I found over the following 8 months was this. Sophie had been living in Boston under my name since April of 3 years ago, 1 month after her phone call to me. She had leased an apartment in the South End using my name, my social security number, my employment history at my firm, and a set of professional references that included my firm's managing partner's name and contact information, which had been verified by the leasing company through a call that Sophie had intercepted by temporarily redirecting my firm's main line through a call forwarding service she had set up using my account credentials, which she had obtained during a visit to my apartment in Providence the previous year, when I had been careless about my laptop password in the specific way you're careless about things around people you trust completely. She had opened a bank account at a Boston branch of my bank using my identification, which she was able to present because we were identical. And she had a copy of my passport from a trip we had taken together 4 years earlier that she had never returned. She had obtained a cell phone contract, a gym membership, and a library card. She had applied for a credit card, which had been declined because the inquiry triggered a freeze I had placed on my credit 2 years earlier and forgotten. The declined application was the first crack in the structure she had built. It was not the last. The employment situation was the most significant and the most technically complex part of what she had done, and I want to explain it carefully because it is the part that most directly affected my professional life and the part that required the most precise documentation to address. Sophie had, in the month after her phone call, applied for a position at a Boston marketing firm using my name, my undergraduate credentials from the University of Maine, and a modified resume that replaced my law degree and bar credentials with a fabricated communications graduate degree from a university she had briefly attended and dropped out of. The position was a mid-level account manager role that did not require a law degree and would not have been verified against bar registration records. She was hired. She worked there for 14 months under my name. Her personnel file, her payroll records, her tax withholding documents, her employee identification, all under my name, my social security number, my date of birth. She received a performance review at the 6-month mark that described her as a strong communicator and a reliable team member. I know this because I eventually obtained a copy of that performance review as part of the documentation process, and I read it with the specific quality of disorientation that comes from reading a professional assessment of someone else's work product filed under your own name. During those 14 months, she was also, I discovered, in a relationship with James, my former fiancé, James Whitfield, the civil engineer, the patient and methodical man I had been engaged to and had separated from 8 months before the credit alert. James had moved to Boston 6 months after our engagement ended. A professional relocation he had mentioned to me briefly in one of the increasingly sparse communications of our post-engagement period. He had not mentioned Sophie. Sophie had not mentioned James. They had found each other in Boston, or more precisely, Sophie had found James in Boston, and she had introduced herself to him using my name and my history and a version of our relationship's end that I can reconstruct from later conversations, but that I will not describe in detail here because some things are too specifically painful to render precisely even at a year's distance. James had believed for 7 months that he was in a relationship with me. He had believed this because the woman he was with had his ex-fiance's face, his ex-fiance's name, his ex-fiance's memories of their relationship, and a version of his ex-fiance's explanations for the gaps and inconsistencies that Sophie's considerable improvisational intelligence had been producing on demand for 7 months. He had believed it because it is very difficult not to believe something when the evidence in front of you, the face, the voice, the history, all confirms it. He had believed it because I had not been in contact with him consistently enough in the post-engagement period for the discrepancies to surface through comparison. And he had believed it because he had wanted to, which is the most human and most understandable reason, and the one I have the least ability to be angry about even now. So I want to tell you about the 8 months between the credit alert and the day I acted, because those 8 months are the part of the story that I am most frequently asked about when I tell it, and the question is always the same. Why did you wait so long? The answer is professional and personal. And I want to be honest about both components because the professional answer alone is technically accurate and personally incomplete. The professional answer is this: I waited because documentation takes time, and incomplete documentation produces incomplete outcomes. I am a criminal defense attorney. I understand from the other side of the table what a well-documented case looks like, and what a rushed one looks like, and what the difference produces in terms of outcomes. What Sophie had done constituted multiple criminal offenses: identity theft, identity fraud, document fraud, obtaining employment by deception, financial fraud, and the civil implications for the damage to my credit record, my professional record, and my personal relationships were significant. Addressing all of it correctly required a complete picture. A complete picture required time. I'd been trained to be patient with documentation. I was patient. The personal answer is harder to say clearly, and I am going to say it anyway, because the personal answer is the honest one, and honesty is the standard I have held myself to in this story. I waited because I could not yet hold the full shape of what Sophie had done without it, producing a kind of grief that I was not finished moving through. Not grief for the things she had taken, which I was angry about, with a clean, workable anger that was professionally useful. Grief for Sophie, for the sister I had known and loved for 32 years, for the specific quality of her, the funny, impulsive, brilliant, reckless, necessary quality of her that had somehow produced this. I was an attorney. I knew what the documentation I was building was going to produce and what it was going to cost her. And I was building it anyway because it was the right thing to do and because she had left me no alternative. But I was also her twin sister, and I had loved her my entire life. And the coexistence of those two things, doing the right thing and grieving the person the right thing was going to destroy, was something I had to sit with for 8 months before I was ready. That is the honest answer. I am a defense attorney, and I know the value of patience. I am also a human being, and I needed time to understand that what I was about to do was not betrayal. It was consequence. There is a difference. I needed 8 months to be certain I understood the difference clearly enough to act on it without hesitation. By January, I was certain. In January, I contacted the Boston Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit with my complete documentation file, 17 months of accumulated evidence organized by category. I annotated with my professional analysis of each element and its legal significance. I contacted my bank, my credit monitoring service, and the leasing company. I contacted my firm's managing partner and disclosed everything. I contacted my bar association's ethics office to formally establish the clean record of my own credentials against the fraudulent use of my name. I contacted James through his firm's email address with a brief, factual message identifying myself, providing 3 pieces of verification that only I could provide, and explaining in a single paragraph what had happened. I did not editorialize. I did not ask for anything. I provided the facts and the documentation, and I let him do whatever he needed to do with them. He called me 4 hours later. That phone call lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes, and I'm not going to tell you what was said in it because some things belong to the people they happen to and not to the story that surrounds them. What I will tell you is that James is not the villain of the story and never was. He was a person who was deceived by someone with my face in a situation designed specifically to exploit every reasonable assumption he would make. He is not the story. Sophie is the story. The Boston Police Department opened a formal investigation in February. Sophie was identified, located, and interviewed in March. She denied the core allegations in the interview, which my assigned detective described to me as the most comprehensively documented denial he'd encountered in 12 years of financial crimes investigation, meaning that the denial was thorough and unambiguous and completely contradicted by the documentation at every point, which is a specific combination that tends to produce the worst outcomes for the person doing the denying. The district attorney's office reviewed the investigation in April and issued a charging recommendation. Sophie retained an attorney, a Boston defense attorney named Marcus Cole, who was competent and who I knew professionally by reputation, and the case entered the pre-trial process with a preliminary hearing scheduled for the fall. I was cooperating with the prosecution as the victim and primary documenting witness. I had not spoken to Sophie since January. She had called me twice and left voicemails that I had not returned because my own attorney had advised against contact during the pending criminal proceedings, and because I did not yet know what I would say if I picked up, I listened to both voicemails. I did not return them. I filed them with the documentation. Last week on a Thursday afternoon, I was at my desk at 4:15 p.m. reviewing a brief when my assistant knocked and said there was a call transferring from the main line, a client intake from Boston PD, someone requesting a criminal defense consultation from Holding. This was not unusual. My firm received intake calls from individuals in custody regularly. My assistant transferred the call. I picked up. I said the standard intake line, "This is Claire Fontaine. How can I help you?" There was a brief pause on the line. Then a voice I have known for 32 years said my name. Not her name, my name. She said, "Claire, this is Claire Fontaine. I've been brought in for questioning and I need representation." She said it with the specific controlled quality of someone who has rehearsed a version of this call and is executing it under significant stress. She thought she was calling my firm as a prospective client. She thought that Claire Fontaine, who answered, was a stranger. She had given the desk officer my name, my bar number, my firm's number. She had called her attorney. She did not know her attorney was her twin sister. I want to tell you what I did in the 3 seconds between recognizing her voice and deciding how to respond, because those 3 seconds contained a decision that I have thought about every day since, and that I believe was the correct decision, and that I also understand was not a simple one. I could have identified myself immediately. I could have said, "Sophie, this is Claire. You need to stop talking," and hang up, and I could have ended the call. That would have been the legally conservative choice. That is what most attorneys would have done in that situation. I did not do that. I said, I understand. Can you tell me what you've been brought in for? I said it in the even professional tone of an attorney conducting an intake call. I said it because I needed to understand what she was being questioned about and whether it was related to the pending case or something new. And I said it because I needed to hear from her own voice, in her own words, what she had to say about what she had done when she believed she was speaking to a stranger she was paying for confidentiality. I said it because I'd been patient for 8 months, building documentation, and I'd been patient for 8 more months through the investigation and the charging process, and I was going to be patient for one more phone call. I let her talk. What Sophie told me in that phone call, believing she was speaking to an attorney she had hired using my name, was not a confession in the legal sense. She was careful in the specific way of someone who has been through one police interview and understands that the content of calls from holding may be recorded. But she was also scared in the way that produces a specific kind of revelatory honesty. The kind that comes out when a person is frightened enough that the performance of innocence requires more energy than they have available, and the truth leaks through the edges of what they are trying to say. She said she had been brought in about the identity situation, which was how she described it, the identity situation, as though it were a bureaucratic complexity rather than 37 months of criminal conduct. She said there had been a misunderstanding about some documents. She said she had been trying to get back on her feet and had made some decisions that looked worse than they were. She said she needed someone who understood the situation and who could explain to the prosecutors that she hadn't meant to hurt anyone. She said, and this is the part I have replayed most often in the weeks since, she said that her sister had always been the one who knew how to handle things like this, that her sister was the smart one, that if her sister would just talk to her, she thought they could work something out because Claire had always known what to do and Claire had always helped her when things fell apart. She was talking about me. She was asking a stranger on the phone for the thing she had always asked me for directly. And the stranger on the phone was me, and I listened to all of it in the specific silence of someone who has finally heard the complete shape of a pattern they spent 32 years inside of. I let her finish. Then I said, in the same even professional tone I had maintained for the entire call, I need to disclose something to you before we continue. I have a conflict of interest in this matter that prevents me from representing you. My name is Claire Fontaine. I am the Claire Fontaine whose identity you have been using for the past 37 months. I am the complaining witness in the criminal case currently pending against you. I am not your attorney. You should hang up and contact Marcus Cole, who is your attorney of record in this matter. I said it clearly and without inflection. Then I was quiet. The silence on the line lasted approximately 6 seconds. Then Sophie said my name, not her version of my name in her voice, the way she had said it my entire life, the specific frequency of it that I would know anywhere under any circumstances at any hour of any day. She said, Claire. I said, yes. She said nothing for another moment. Then she said, how long have you known? I said, since May of last year. Another silence. Then she said, I'm sorry. I said, I know. I said, hang up and call Marcus Cole. Then I put the phone down. I want to tell you what the following week looked like, because it is the part of the story where the legal resolution and the personal resolution diverge and run in parallel. And I think it is important to describe Both tracks, honestly, rather than collapsing one into the other, the way these stories are sometimes told, where the legal outcome stands for the emotional one, and the complexity is tidied into a resolution it has not actually earned. The legal track. I disclosed the phone call to the prosecution's office the following morning through my attorney, including the fact that I had answered the intake call in my professional capacity before recognizing my sister's voice and had terminated the call immediately upon the recognition and disclosure as required. My attorney advised that the call content obtained prior to the recognition and disclosure was legally complex in terms of admissibility, but that the disclosure itself was the correct action and that the prosecution did not intend to seek any adverse finding against me for the circumstances of the call. Marcus Cole filed a motion the following week that I will not describe in detail here. The preliminary hearing is scheduled. The case is ongoing. I am still cooperating with the prosecution as the primary victim witness. I have not been in the same room as Sophie since before any of this began. I will be in the same room as her at the preliminary hearing. I have thought about that moment many times in the past week. I have not yet found the right way to hold it. The personal track. I called my mother the evening of the phone call. She had known since January that the investigation was proceeding, and she had been navigating the specific position of a mother whose two daughters are on opposite sides of a criminal proceeding with the kind of determined, heartbroken competence that I have always associated with her and that I now understand was the quality she had been practicing for 32 years in a family that required it. She listened to everything I said about the phone call. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Are you okay?" I said I didn't know. She said that was an honest answer. She said she was proud of me. I said, for what? She said, for doing the right thing for 14 months without stopping, even when it was the hardest thing. I said it wasn't the hardest thing. She said, what was the hardest thing? I said hearing Sophie say she was sorry and knowing it was true and knowing it wasn't enough and knowing I was going to keep going anyway. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know, sweetheart. I know." We stayed on the phone for another hour without talking about anything important, and it was the most useful conversation I had that week. James reached out the day after the phone call with a brief message asking if I was okay. I said I was. He said he had been following the case from a distance and that he wanted me to know he was sorry for his part in the 14 months. He hadn't known. I said there was no part to be sorry for. He said he knew that intellectually and was working on it emotionally. I said I understood that process. He said he imagined I did. We have not spoken since. I do not know what that means for the future, and I am not making decisions about it yet because the present is still demanding enough that the future can wait. I am going to tell you what I know now that I did not know before this happened, because I think it is the most useful part of the story, and because telling it is the reason I am sitting here telling the rest of it. I know what it costs to be the person in a relationship who is always ready with the right kind of help. I know what it produces in the other person and what it produces in you, and why those two things are not the same, even when they look the same from the outside. I was the stable one. I was the one who knew what to do. I was the one Sophie called when things fell apart. I built that, identity over 32 years, and I was proud of it in the specific way you are proud of a thing that is genuinely true about you and genuinely useful to people you love. I did not understand that the pride and the usefulness and the love had together produced a structure that my sister had learned to live inside of in a way that made her less capable of standing outside it. Not because she was weak, but because the structure was so complete and so reliable that it had never required her to build her own. I helped her into a dependency I did not see because I was too busy being useful to look at what the usefulness was producing. That is not entirely my responsibility. What Sophie did is entirely her responsibility. But the pattern that made it possible was built by both of us over 32 years, and I have had to sit with my part of it alongside my anger about her part of it. And that is not a comfortable thing to sit with. I am sitting with it anyway, because the alternative is to extract the useful lesson and discard the uncomfortable one. And I am a defense attorney, and I know what happens when you build a case on incomplete evidence. I am still practicing law. I am still in Providence in the apartment I kept after the engagement ended, which I have spent the past year making more deliberately mine in the small ways that a person makes a space theirs when they are no longer sharing it with anyone. I have a plant on the kitchen windowsill that I've kept alive for 8 months, which is longer than I've kept any plant alive, and I find this fact disproportionately satisfying in a way I've decided not to analyze. My credit record has been fully restored. My professional record contains no adverse notations. My name in the Boston metropolitan area refers exclusively to me again, which is a sentence I did not expect to ever need to say. The apartment in the South End has a new tenant. The job at the marketing firm has a new employee. The life that Sophie built from the materials of mine has been carefully and completely dismantled, documented, and returned. What remains is mine. It has always been mine. I just had to prove it, which I did methodically and completely over 14 months, because I am an attorney and documentation is the foundation of everything, and I have always known how to build a foundation that holds. My sister called me from a holding cell using my name, and I let her finish the call because I needed to hear her say to a stranger she believed would protect her that her sister had always known what to do. She was right. I did. I just did something different with it this time. Has someone you trusted ever used your identity, your name, your work, your reputation, as though it were theirs to take? Have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and protecting someone you loved and discovered they were not actually the same choice? Tell me in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one every week without exception.